I just had a faint idea. I thought, well, perhaps I might be able to play one game of football with Melbourne. And
one thing that will never leave my memory is the first game running out for the Melbourne Football Club.
And just running down that race, with people, the crowd screaming and everyone behind you. It was just an awesome feeling, and I'll never forget that.
To come to Melbourne and see the Melbourne Football Club run around the MCG. And
it was just like floating on air.
You played on the MCG, everybody wanted to be involved in the whole scene there.
I am playing at the most traditional club in this country, I think, without a doubt.
Melbourne Football Club had great tradition.
The oldest club and all this tradition.
Magnificent people. Be hard to beat anywhere.
It was a great honour to be asked down, and you're always pretty well aware of the history of the place.
Yes, it was the tradition club.
Well, what did it mean to play for the Melbourne Football Club during this era? I mean, how lucky can a man be?
I certainly consider myself very fortunate to be part of Melbourne.
Well, Melbourne gave me an opportunity. For me, I owe a lot to the club.
It created some absolutely wonderful sporting memories.
I've started playing here. I want to finish my career here.
It's a grand old flag, it's a high-flying flag, it's the emblem for me and for you. It's the emblem of the team we love, the team of the red and the blue. Every heart beats true for the red and the blue, and we'll sing this song to you. Should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the red.
Percy Beames. I played 213
Don
games
Cordner.
for Melbourne.
I played 166 games for Melbourne.
Noel McMahen. I played 175 games for the Melbourne Football Club between.
Ian Ridley. I played 130 games for the Melbourne Football Club.
Bob Johnson. I played 159 games for Melbourne Football Club between
Ron
the years
Barassi. And I played 204 senior games and kicked 295 goals for the
Frank
Melbourne
Adams.
Football Club.
I played 164 games and kicked 180 goals for the Melbourne Football
Hassa
Club.
Mann. I played 183 games for the Melbourne Football
Barry
Club.
Bourke played 175 games for the Melbourne Football Club between 1963.
Garry Hardeman. I played 226 games with the Melbourne Football Club.
Robert Flower. I played 272 games and kicked 315 goals.
Jim Stynes, recruited from Dublin. I've played 244
Garry
games.
Lyon. I've played 203 games and kicked
Todd Viney.
383 goals.
I've played 194 games and kicked 69 goals.
Anthony McDonald. I've played 19 games for the Melbourne
Shane
Football
Woewodin.
Club.
I played 22 games for the Melbourne Football Club, and I wear Guernsey number 22.
Should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the red and the blue. Keep your eye on the red and the blue.
Yes, I think we've got the house in order. I'm a great believer in that. There's a photograph down at Melbourne. It's got 4 heads in it. It's got Sir Albert Chadwick as chairman of the club, Ivor Warren Smith as chairman of selectors, Norman Smith as coach, and Jim Cardwell as secretary. I always believed until you fill those heads, you wouldn't get success.
Oh, I think what's happening at the club is absolutely essential. It's different now. It has to be structured and managed and attacked like a campaign.
We've got a good core nucleus of young players there at the present that need to be built on to get success in the next couple of years.
It's the attitude of the guys nowadays. Your Shane Woewodin's, who really has come along in leaps and bounds.
You always get told that your second year is always your hardest. I'm so determined for that not to happen to me this year. I want my second season to be even bigger and better than my first.
It's a whole gamut of new faces, and with new faces brings a lot of excitement and a lot of enthusiasm. And for the first time in a long time, I've seen guys doing extra training. That shows me that those guys want to succeed, and that gives me a bit of extra confidence as well.
But I sort of look around at what we've got, and I can see that there's a lot of potential there. And I also look at the responsibility that I've got to take and the challenge.
And now we've got Neil Danaher, who's very exciting for us, and I predict a finals campaign for us. It's a lot more exciting at the club this year.
Having Neil and all the support staff, that in itself just sort of gives all the players around a bit of a lift in terms of knowing that we're going to be out there. Everyone's really behind us, and people are really sort of out to look after you, I guess.
There's a great bunch of young kids coming through now, and in the next, say, 2 to 5 years, I know we're going to win a premiership. It's going to be great to be a part of that, and that's just my biggest ambition at this club, is to help the club come through and win a premiership.
I was never keen on playing league football. I was never league orientated, and I wasn't interested. And I went to the university in 1940 from Melbourne Grammar School, and I was fortunate in being able to get into the University Blacks team, which was pretty unusual for a man first year up from school. And then the war broke out. I was still very young. My brother Ted had been approached by Melbourne because he too had played in the Blacks the previous year, and he'd been playing in Melbourne from the middle of 1941. Now, I was approached at the same time to play with Melbourne, but I really wasn't very interested, and it was no big deal in those days. Melbourne won their last match by enough to put them into second position, and they were then due to play in the second semi-final the following week. And they approached me to play, which I did. I didn't play very well, but we won that match, and that put us up to straight into the grand final. In the normal course of events, I would have been dropped, but one of the other ruckmen got injured, so I had another chance, and I played in the grand final of that year. As far as I was concerned, it was just a game of football, and I got to know the fellas fairly well. I was doing my medical course at the time. It was wartime, so things were different. As far as I was concerned, it was something to do on Saturday afternoon. You went to lectures on Saturday morning, and you had a cut lunch.
Jack Chesil, secretary of the Melbourne Football Club, lived at North Essendon. And after training of a Tuesday and a Thursday night, he would get in a train to Mordialloc, talk to mum and dad and to try and talk them into allowing me to go to Melbourne, then travel by train and bus back to North Essendon. Today, I think all the chief executives have got Rolls Royces, haven't they? But I decided to go to Melbourne because my mother thought Jack Chesil was a fine man and he'd look after me.
Well, I was recruited from a place called Nearham South down Warragul way, but I found out years later that Ken Carlin, who was the top recruiting person in the league at that particular time, he went down to Warragul because he thought I was playing there on permits, and that wasn't the case. When he got there, the game had finished. The only person there was the umpire, and he asked the umpire how did a young bloke Bourke go, and he must have given me a favourable report. So Ken went back to the club and said, yes, he's a reasonable player, let's get him down and have a go, and that's how it happened. First time Ken saw me play was when I ran out with the red and blue.
I wrote a letter to the Melbourne Football Club requesting a game for the Melbourne Force, which was under 17s, played down the road from where I lived. And I got a letter back that said they only picked the best kids in our recruiting zone, and your name's not on our list. So I wrote another letter back to say that I really would like to play for the Melbourne under-17s, as this was my ambition to play football, and barracking for Melbourne, that was going to be the be-all, end-all. They said, come down at training and we'll see how you end up. And I walked into the rooms on the first night down in East Bentley, and they looked at me and said, listen mate, you're skinny, you wear glasses, I don't think you got much of a hope. But they let me train, and I actually made the list as a 16-year-old. When I went to play for the under-17s, I couldn't get a clearance from Parramatta Districts, so I stood out of football for a year. The following year I played in the under-17s, got promoted to the under-19s, and then as a 17-year-old made my debut for the Melbourne First. And if anyone claims to recruited me, I recruited myself.
I was playing on a very tough character in Darky Nolder. And Darky had the reputation of being a very aggressive, aggravating, a real pain in the A, I guess you could say. I mean, was grabbing hold of the Guernseys, giving you one in the ribs, knocked backward and sort of rubbing the stops down on the shins. And at half time he was giving me hell, and Clydie Laidlaw, a typical country lad, came across to me and said, "Hassa," he said, "I can't stand that bastard on you." And I said to Clyde, "Well, I'm not overwrapped myself." He said, "Bring him over near me and let me know you're there." So I said, "Clyde, that would be my pleasure." So early in the third quarter, the ball came to centre half forward and Laidlaw contested the ball and it came to the ground. I picked it up and called out, "I'm here, Clyde, I've got it." As I picked the ball up, I heard this enormous roar from the crowd, and then I heard, "You're right, Hassa," and I can recall them carting Darky off the ground, knocked right out.
Barassi had a fantastic kick-out plan that me being 6 foot would play me on Bartlett as a half-back flanker against Bartlett as a half-forward flanker and play him all day and run off him, because Bartlett was renowned for not chasing and also not a good overhead mark. And every time that we'd have a kick-out, he put everyone to the opposite side of the ground and left me alone with Bartlett and would kick the ball to me. But it got to the last quarter and it was touch and go who was going to win this particular game. And I marked the ball after coming down the ground in the goal square. I've marked it, gone back and kicked it into the post, and it really was demoralising for me and humiliating in the same breath that I had to do something about it. Well, next time the ball came down, and this is very vivid in my mind, that it got kicked to the back half of the centre square. I've gone up for a mark, I've tapped it down one-handed, it's dribbled out in front of me and someone was coming at me. I've tapped it over his head and got it again and taken 2 bounces down the other end and kicked it from the 50-metre line and it's gone through. So that, just the game itself and the memory of recouping the goal that I'd lost only minutes earlier is probably a piece of play that was sticks in my mind.
I mean, it's one of the great sights of football, seeing that guy running down the wing, bouncing the ball. The way he could just smoothly change direction and just poetry motion. But Robbie, if he was in today, he would have been into the weights. I mean, he would have been forced into weights much earlier. And Robbie never attacked the weights. It was anything approaching gay abandon, I can tell you that.
I remember once it was in my last year playing, and a fella called Bill Deans, he was in the back pocket. And Billy had broken his nose twice, and he had a very deformed nose. And he had seen all sports specialists, and he was told he would have his nose operated on and straightened after he'd finished football. We were playing against St Kilda. It was about 20 seconds before half-time, and he got a frightful knock on the nose and knocked clean unconscious. And then the bell rang for half-time, and there he is lying on the ground with his nose pushed even further across his face. He couldn't feel any pain at all because he was out. So I thought, why not? As far as I'm concerned, he's under an anaesthetic. So I straightened his nose. Boom. He's never had an operation and he looks very handsome. I never sent the club a bill. I perhaps should have, because I've saved them a hospital fee and a surgeon's fee and an anaesthetist fee and everything else.
I was given a ticket to go and see my first league football match. Up to that point, I'd never seen a league football match in my life, and Melbourne was playing Footscray. And I was terribly excited because all I knew about football was what I'd read in the Sporting Globe that used to come up on the Adelaide Express of a night time. I thought it was wonderful. I thought, these fellows, what they could do, they could kick and distances and take phenomenal marks and do all kinds of things. So I was anxious to see these fellows in action. By the end of the first quarter, I thought, well, these fellows are human after all. And by half-time, I just had a faint idea. I thought, well, perhaps I might be able to get one game of football with Melbourne, and then go back, be told I'm not good enough, and then go back to Ballarat and say, well, I played league football. So the following week, I got my clearance through, and I was picked in the seconds to play out at Victoria Park against Collingwood, a great introduction to football. We got thrashed, it was only to be expected, but I think I kicked about 4 goals out of a total of 8. And to my amazement, the next week I'm picked in the Melbourne first to play against Carlton out at Carlton. Well, I remained there for the next 13 years, and I was never dropped.
As a kid, I'd go to the games and watch Melbourne play and stand behind the goals and collect the footies as they'd go over, because there's a big concrete section behind the goals, and we'd collect all the balls that come over so we could get a kick of the real football. It was just fantastic to be playing for the club you were loyal to, and I was fortunate enough to be in the recruiting zone, which was Murrumbeena, and therefore got to play for the club I loved.
When I was a kid, I was attacked by my mother and relatives and all their friends from the Melbourne Football Club, and I really had no hope of being anything else but a Melbourne Football Club supporter, and would never have thought of or dreamt anything like ever moving away from their support and later on as a player. I eventually did, of course, as we know, but no, I began with an ambition to play for the Melbourne Football Club and to be captain.
Wintertime in Melbourne, and some things stay true, like dark skies round the skipping girl and a shower or two, like mud in the car park at the MCG. It's a long walk down Clarendon when you can't wait to see the boys running down onto that holy ground. I feel like I'm 13 again, and the cup is in our hands. And when I dream, I can hear the sounds, see gleaming silver, red and blue as the demons go round. Summer's gone, the bets are on, you keep it close to your heart. You're thinking about those chilly May Saturdays at the park. You never lose that feeling that it'll be your year. And there's no place you'd rather be than here, watching the boys run down onto that holy ground. I feel like I'm 13 again, and the cup is in our hands. When I dream, I can hear the sounds, see gleaming silver, red and blue as the demons go around, watching the boys run down onto that holy ground. I feel like I'm 13 again, the cup is in our hands. And when I dream, I can hear the sounds, see gleaming silver, red and blue as the demons go place I'd rather be than here, watching the demons go round.
I suppose the most extraordinary thing that happened as a player was when we drew the grand final in 1948. With time on to play in the last quarter, the score was 7-27 Essendon and we were 8-9. And Norman Smith got a mark on the half-forward line on the flank and kicked, if you please, in this day and age, a drop kick right through the goal. 2 minutes later, Spud Dullard got a mark at half-forward centre, kicked a punt kick right through the middle, and there we are. The scores are equal. There was play in the middle of the ground, and then the ball went out of bounds just near our behind post. The boundary umpire was a long way away, and I thought, I can get there and punch this. All I've got to do is to punch it through the behind. I don't care about a goal. I know there's seconds to go. And as I rushed there, I could see Norm Smith in front. He was in my way. And I was screaming to Norman Smith to leave it, to leave it, to leave it. He grabbed the ball, intending to kick a goal, and I punched the ball at the same time. I punched it out of his hands, and the ball rolled within about 3 feet of the goal line. And Cecil Ruddle kicked it out and cleared it, and Doug Hayward got the ball and was running into goal when the bell rang. And of course there was a stunned silence, from a deafening roar to an absolute stunned silence. And we thought we'd had our chance. We could only beat Essendon once, and that was it. We only had to beat them by 1 point. Point of fact, the next week we beat them by 5 goals.
The 1955 Premiership, being captain and beating Collingwood, not much better. Not much better. Bob Rose, in the first quarter of the grand final, he bounced the ball twice. And I happened to be chasing him, and he bounced it the second time and laughed. And I thought that was a bit cheeky. So I just side bumped him as he kicked the ball. That was the day of the Healy-Adams clash, which took all the heat off me.
The Healy incident, if it had been televised, maybe they would have replayed it and it would have died a death very, very quickly. But basically, I came on from the interchange, or not the interchange, but the reserves bench in those days, and ran straight at Healy, who was running towards the bench about 60 yards away, and unfortunately he hadn't seen me. And I dipped my shoulder to hit Healy, and at full pace, and Healy was travelling at full pace, and slowed down a bit because he was bouncing the ball, obviously. I was running professionally at that stage and was running inside even time. And I guess at 60 yards you're really absolute top speed, and our heads hit. And I know that much has sort of been made of the incident, but we really were incredibly lucky that one of us wasn't seriously injured. And, well, I say seriously injured, Des Healy had his skull fractured and nose broken in 5 places, and all I got was concussion. But we were fortunate that the more serious injury did not occur. The other thing, of course, is if that happened in a home-and-home game, maybe the question would not be asked. But it happened in the grand final, and those things tend to live on. But it certainly was a spectacular one, and my recollection of it basically is what people tell me happened.
Might have been this 57 grand final. I had the ball on the outer half-back flank, and I had to do a U-turn. And, sometimes you're walking down the street and you go left and the person coming towards you goes on their right, so you clash and you go back and forth. This happened on a bloody footy match. And it was my teammate, Keith Carroll. And in the end, I've actually hacked him away. And swiveled around and did my kick. And Keith still talks about this to this day, because, I haven't whacked him across the face, I've whacked him across the arm. Get out the bloody way. Because it was really sort of embarrassing, like clashing like this stupidly in front of 105,000 people. And Keith, he said, Barassi, you don't do that to your teammates.
Well, my start was a little bit different. I was more or less thrown in the deep end, you could say. In 1931, I had just started to play senior football in Ballarat with a team called Golden Point. And I was getting changed to play in my third game when one of the committeemen of my club came up to me and, quite out of the blue, he said, we're going to Melbourne on Monday morning. You may have to stay, it's about a job, you may have to stay overnight, so just in case you do, you better throw in a pair of pyjamas and toothbrush and the various things. So we took the bus down to Melbourne and we saw the secretary of the Melbourne Football Club. Manzies was his name, Andrew Manzies. And after spending most of the day there, it looked as if we were going to return to Ballarat that night. Manzies then got in touch with the chairman of the Melbourne Football Club. Another committeeman was called in and he took me to a house, and there I was put up and asked to share a room with a chap about 50. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, I was woken up with a lot of laughter and gaiety that appeared to be going on. I thought that was strange, but went off again to sleep. And in the morning I said to my roommate, I said, there was a lot of fun going on last night. I said, was there a party on? He replied, no. He said, I didn't want to mention it to you at the time, but he said, we have a couple of girls here that entertain menfolk at night. I'd spent my first night in a house of ill fame.
I went hunting one time and brought a snake back, a brown snake, and it didn't have a head on it, luckily, but I remember taking that back and putting it in Errol Spalding's locker and watching him get undressed after training and sort of put his hand in to grab his shirt without looking in and take about a 5-foot leap, which is higher than I've ever seen him jump.
I figured that when it was a wet day, the only way to get a kick was to get to the front of the pack and come back on the pack. And yes, I got a lot of free kicks, but I've just had a hip replacement and I can hardly walk with the bad back that I've got, so I'm suffering through it all now. So all I can say is some bastard must have been hitting me.
I won a Brownlow medal in 1946. I had a phone call about 9:15 at night from a woman. She said, is that you, Dr. Cordner? I said, yes. This is Mr. So-and-so here. I've just heard on the wireless that you've won something. I don't know what it is, but I'd just like to say how glad I am. This was a patient of mine. And she hung up, and about 2 seconds later, Percy Beames rang me. And Percy had been the AIDS representative at the count, and he told me that I'd won it. No big deal, no nothing. A photographer came out and took a photograph of me, and that was the end of that. No presentation until the 13th of March the following year, when it was the League annual meeting at Harrison House, and I was summoned to be present at 9 o'clock. I was told to wait outside, and inside there was a meeting with 24 League delegates, and somebody came out and said, Cordner, you're wanted. So I went in, and the then president of the league, Dr. W.C. McClelland, stood up and said, Player Cordner, you have been judged our best and fairest player. Here is your medal, and here is your citation. Please continue with our game. Good night, Dr. Cordner.
Ivan Warren Smith, Bert Chadwick, Checker Hughes, and then you've got Jim Cardwell, he was the Prince of Secretaries and probably still is. Wonderful people, and they did instill the love of the club into us.
Checker Hughes was the greatest, of course. He was always my football father.
He used to invite you down to his hotel to have a drink sometimes at the Greyhound. He used to have the Greyhound in Swan Street. As a matter of fact, he only lived just around the corner from me in Richmond. So I just go up and knock on the door with Checker, and the next minute he'd have a couple of bottles on the table. That was Checker.
Oh, the most outstanding character in my life was Dennis Cordner. He was absolutely a magnificent man in every way, and he is truly my unforgettable character.
Dennis Cordner was a great idol of mine, and I eventually got to play with him. Albie Rodder, who was a rover, used to pinch my father's spot on the side occasionally. I heard later on he was an idol of mine. I used to go in the rooms as a kid, and quite a few of the people would talk to me because I was the son of their killed teammates. So you can imagine they'd feel pretty kindly towards young Ron Barassi. And also Teddy Jackson, the Aboriginal winger, he was a favourite of mine too. And of course Norm Smith and Jack Mueller, Shane McGrath, they're all heroes of mine.
In actual fact, two of the men who have so much responsibility for my particular life were Jim Cardwell and Norm Smith, and they both taught me many, many things which certainly helped me as I went through my life.
The greatest influence on my football was Norm Smith.
Barassi stood out, I guess, first and foremost, because of his determination, because of his courage. He had great leadership qualities, was very inspirational, and had that never-say-die attitude.
One would look at Ron Barassi for what he achieved. Ron worked very hard, had absolutely fantastic desire. But there are other players who I guess didn't get the publicity that Ron got. I guess I speak particularly, say, of a player like Ian Ridley, who had enormous courage. He was battered from pillar to post week in, week out. I don't ever think I've seen a player who could give more in a game over a period of time than Ian Ridley did.
I rate Ian Ridley very highly. He was a very, very small man, but his raw, out-and-out courage was just outstanding. The other player that I had a great respect for was Brian Dixon, mainly because of his ball-getting ability and his never-beaten attitude.
To venture up into the senior side after 4 games in the reserves, I was playing with guys like immortals like Hassa Mann, Frank Davis, Donnie Williams. It was really all inspiring, to play, with these guys.
Yeah, in the 1958 grand final, I got really cleaned up. I was sweeping around the front of a pack to pick up the ball, and Bill Sarong came in and gave me the greatest elbow in the face one could ever receive. It really knocked me rotten. It broke my nose, but in those days, of course, no one got reported, so Billy didn't get reported. I got the free kick. They pushed me to my feet, and I can remember still having the kick, but within minutes after that, I had to come off and walk past a bench containing Collingwood trainers, and did they give me the raspberry.
My theory for the defeat was that half of us wanted to fight and the other half wanted to squib. That was my opinion. If we'd done either of one, I reckon, we would have won.
The pressure was right on us. There is no doubt that Collingwood took the game right up to Melbourne, or we got sucked in. They made out that they wanted to fight, and we seemed to decide that we'd be part of that. And the next thing was that we lost our run, and they were just too good for us on the day. Bugger 'em.
The 1960 Premiership too, I mean, I played okay in that, but it was a match in which every Melbourne player who got to the ground, in between his car, walking around the laneway at the back of the rooms inside the stadium, he would have been consulted by about 50 Melbourne supporters, I would have thought, particularly the ones that had been in the Premiership loss 2 years before. And the circumstances of the 1960 Grand Final were exactly the same. We had the same opponents. We'd thrashed them in the second semi-final. It was a wet day. We were raging favourites. Collingwood weren't. And, I mean, I've never, ever, in all my time in football, seen a team so focused. And it didn't matter what any Collingwood player said or did in that game. It was just absolutely ignored. I can remember getting belt on the lip at a throw-in. I had to take the throw-in because the ruckman was away for that clash, and Murray Widerman also took it. So we both contested the ball, and he whacked me in the upper lip on the right-hand side there. And that was... He must have damaged a nerve, because it used to tingle every time I touched it for the next 20 years. But I just looked at him. I didn't even say anything. I just looked at him. Didn't say a thing, because we had this lesson 2 years before, a bitter, bitter lesson.
Yes, in the 64 Grand Final side, I guess in the last 5 minutes there were 2 or 3 things that happened that do stick out of my mind, and the run of Gabbos, and I can recall being back off the play at that time and just feeling so helpless that there was nobody within 60 metres of him, and the whole thing was just going down the drain. I was able to get the ball on the half-back flank, I think it was, and have about 3 bounces and kick the ball to the point of the square, and Hassa Mann took the mark.
I recall taking a reasonable mark over Ronnie Reeves, and only some 30 metres out from goal. And I thought, well, gee, this is fantastic. I've kicked the side into the finals. Here's a chance for me now to bask myself in glory, kick the goal. I mean, it was one of those goals that was unmissable. Go back and you can guess the legs went to Jelly, lucky to make the distance, lucky to kick a point. And it was from that kick-in that Neil Crompton, in following his Mickey Bone down into the forward line, scooped the ball up and kicked the goal, and all is history now. Melbourne won by 4 points.
We'd pinched that game in the last few seconds, and I can recall almost the first thing that Smithy said after winning a premiership: when you got a run like that and you're running straight at the goal, you put the ball at the point of the square. And I thought to myself, well, here's a fellow who's just pinched a premiership, he's just won another premiership, and all he's thinking of is where I kicked that ball at that point in time.
Well, I lived with Norm Smith for 4 years, between the ages of 17 and 21, and it's probably a pretty unusual thing to be living with a coach. It's a good way of getting a game, actually. I wish that was true, because Norm was... I heard later that he just didn't want to be accused of favouritism.
He was probably crueler as far as Barassi was concerned than he was on other players. And I would think that Barassi would say now that it was for his own benefit.
Oh, yeah, I think he used to needle me. I didn't need much, of course, but occasionally, like every player, I did. But no, he was great in one-to-one confrontations and consultations.
At times, he'd get to you during a game. At times, he'd get you straight after a game, and at times, maybe you were aware that you did something during a game and you'd be waiting for him to come after the match and he wouldn't approach you, and you thought you got away with it, but you found out on Tuesday night his memory was still great.
At half-time I came in and Smithy got stuck into me. I hadn't kicked a goal. Accused me of not leading up and 2 or 3 other things. Anyway, in the second half we got our act together and we eventually won the game, and won the game quite comfortably, and I kicked 5 goals. And after the game, Norm came up to me as he walked around all the other players and with Checky Hughes, and he said to me, how many did you get? And I said, 5, Norm. And he just turned to Checky Hughes and said, the bastard kicked 5, and walked off. Obviously, he was that annoyed the way that I'd gone about my business early in the piece. There was no way knowing that he was prepared to pat me on the back. And that's the way Norm Smith was.
Well, Norm Smith, when he played the game, he was just a normal meek and mild player, particularly early in his career. He didn't develop the toughness until later on.
So he had 3 years as a coach, partly playing coach and non-playing coach at Fitzroy. And I think coaching sort of hardens you, toughens you.
Norm was always hard.
Tough but fair, and we used to have a bit of fun with those words too.
Hard and just. Hard bastard and just a prick. No, Smithy was a great guy, and we had a communication problem. We'll put it that way. That's about all I can say.
Norman Smith was a wonderful man. He was a great friend, but in football he was a tyrant. He really was very, very tough.
Now, of course, Norm Smith always said to us that if you're knocked down, the only time you stay down is if you're knocked out or you're dead.
The way that Norm approached it, he was always going to burn some players, and he did burn some players. But if you were strong enough to put up with it and survive, there's no doubt in my mind that you became a better player.
I think you need to be a pretty small-minded person not to come out away from any of those conversations with Norm thinking, well, this guy's very legitimate in his thoughts. He thinks he's doing the right thing. I mightn't agree with him at the time, but he's not doing it as a personal animosity thing. He's doing it for the betterment of me as a player and for the betterment of the Melbourne Football Club.
The funny thing about playing under Norman Smith is that nothing funny ever happened.
Well, my favourite story, it's not a funny story about Norm, it was when he was coaching Fitzroy, and I happened to be over to his house in fact, I think I went to the football with him. But he had this little van that he had for his business, and he said, get in the van, Ronnie, we're just going for a bit of a drive. And he drove around the streets, and I started to see the same streets and the same houses more than once. I thought, and that's what he was actually doing. And I looked across at him once there, and he was crying. And this was the day in which he's going to play Melbourne for the first time after being with them as a player for that huge amount of time, with 4 premierships as a player. And he had to play against them because he didn't leave Melbourne willingly. He didn't get the coaching job and then took an offer which meant a coaching job. So he was a man of mixed emotions that day. And I remember many years later in 1965, and I'm in the same position as Norm was, as in I'm playing and coaching against Melbourne. And Norm kept his side inside the dressing rooms at Carlton as long as he could. Umpires went in twice, and he was doing it to give me a real stare up. And because I didn't like playing against Melbourne either. I mean, I wanted to win badly because you've got other duties and responsibilities and all that. But that was Norm. He was very, very psychological. Should have been committed.
I guess the player that I admired most at Melbourne was Robert Flower. I haven't seen a player with the skills. I think he was just a complete player. He started in 1973, I think it was, and he was about 9 stone at the time. There was nothing of him, but he just had tremendous pace. He had enormous ball skills. He had terrific courage.
As a player at the club, there was a lot of people I did admire and looked up to. First of all, when I first arrived there, Barry Bourke took me under his wing and introduced me to all the players because I had never trained or been down to the training with the senior side. I'd only seen them play, and I was coming up through under 19s, and Barry Bourke looked after me enormously well there. In the latter days, in my last years, I think, of course, Garry Lyon was in his first years, and Todd Viney had just come to the club as well, and they both ended up to be good, close friends of mine, and I respect their playing capabilities as well.
Look, I got down there, I just turned 16 years of age, so it was all brand new to me, and I walked around probably my head in the clouds for a little while, but the great players were the Robbie Flower, there's no doubt about that. He was the Melbourne Footy Club.
It's Robbie Flower, who probably took me under his wing when I first came over. We spent a lot of time with the Flowers. He was just a great character, he was a legend of the game, but he was so down to earth and such a nice bloke that you could only admire him for that. Garry Lyon's been another major influence, a true professional, in my opinion, the standout captain in the league.
The player that probably stands out the most will be Garry Lyon. I've played right through my career with Garry, and he's a pretty inspiring sort of footballer, very passionate.
I admire Jim Stynes, of course, for what he's been able to achieve and from where he's come from.
Brett Lovett and Jimmy Stynes for their durability.
Jimmy Stynes, it's an unbelievable story, really. 10 years consecutively without missing a game is fantastic.
Rod Grinter, for his, by the end of his career, he was really someone I admired for turning his life around and getting on with it. He was an admired player from the footy club.
I admire Stephen Tingo, the way he goes about his football and the way he prepares himself.
Stephen Tingo, probably the hardest working player at the club.
Stephen Tingo, so just his work ethic and just the way he sort of conducts himself around the footy club and how much of a match winner he is and how on field he's just so important, I think, to the footy club.
I admire Todd Viney and Brett Lovett, who are very good mates of mine, and I know what they go through to play footy.
Todd Viney, what he does in the field, he's just so hard at it, and he just lifts the team. Doesn't stop trying, just grinds his way. Yeah, he's fantastic.
Coming down, calling me. Turn around, turn around, turn around. I see the colors of history, and I can feel the push. I'm still searching for a sign. Someone's making a move, leading me through to a forward line. And I gotta keep running, and I gotta keep jumping. Gotta keep running and jumping to the top of the hill. Every muscle hurting. There's one thing for certain, this is no time to be standing still. Burning up inside. Now there's something to prove for the red and the blue. And there's no place left to hide. Now I gotta keep running, I gotta keep jumping, gotta keep running and jumping to the top of the hill. I know when your body's bursting, every muscle hurting, there's one thing for certain, this is no time to be standing still. I gotta keep running, I gotta keep jumping, gotta keep running and jumping to the top of the hill.
It was a beautiful day, and I can remember that perfectly, just before half-time. And in the centre, around about the centre of the ground, was Jack Casson. He was a supposedly tough Essendon ruckman, and he was going to take this mark on his chest. And I thought to myself, well, I've got to make an effort. If I rush towards him, he might take his eye off the ball and drop it. So I tore straight at him. As I'm coming towards him, he raised his right leg and drew it back, and I guessed what his intention was going to be. As I got close to him, he's going to thrust out his leg, and I was going to cop it right down the centre. But he just made his mark just a fraction too early, and I hauled off and I hit him right in the chin. Bang! Down he went, no one near us. And immediately I thought, you idiot, you're out for the season now. So I'm standing on the mark, and the trainers rushed out to the ground, and the players gathered, and I'm waiting for the umpire to tap me on the back and say, "Number 24, you're reported." And nothing happened. And at half-time I inquired, was I reported? No. After the match I inquired again, no report. So I went to work the next few days, and on the Wednesday, the phone rings, and Alan Coward here. Alan Coward, he was the umpire. "Alan, what can I do for you?" He said, "Nothing." He said, "You've done a blood enough already." I said, "Why is that, Alan?" He said, "Well, last night I was called before the umpires board, and they roasted hell out of me. They wanted to know why I didn't report Beames." I said, "As a matter of fact, Alan," I said, "I was surprised too." I said, "Why didn't you report me?" He said, "Well, I saw what he intended to do, and I thought he deserved it."
Yeah, there's one very visual moment that sticks in my mind. It was, I guess, around 1963-64, and there was always the argument on who was the best player, Barassi or Whitten. Who was Mr. Football? And I can recall the ball going out of bounds. It was right in front of the members' stand. From a throw-in, the ball came to the ground, and both Barassi and Whitten sort of went for the ball, and they clashed, and the ball sort of spilled in front of them. And they went on with the ball, and they chased the ball, and they met again, and they clashed, and the ball kept in front of them, and they went back again. They went for the entire across the ground. They must have met at least 4 or 5 times, and just sort of trying to outdo the other to try and sort of prove a point on who was going to be classed as Mr. Football. And this was one test, I guess, that the public really had to determine that fact. And after chasing the ball the entire distance across the ground, the ball went out of bounds on the opposite half-forward flank, and both players stood back and looked at each other as if to say, well, we really didn't prove it. We really didn't prove anything today. And I thought that contest, where there were so many people almost sort of grasping to sort of try and get a result, it never eventuated. And I guess even today there's that argument, who really was entitled to be called Mr. Football.
And as for heroes, I suppose my mother is one. She's had a huge influence on me, and just watching the way in which she lives her life.
She has influence on my life as a person because she was a very good person, very strong, had a lot of great qualities, and her ethics were just absolutely sensational as far as I was concerned.
My parents are my heroes, and obviously they've been behind me ever since I was a young kid. Yeah, they've just been fantastic for me. You just can't explain how much they back you up, through your whole life, and just support you, take you to training, pick you up, take you to school, do all those things for you.
I see a real difference between heroes and stars. I see heroes as people who do make a difference in other people's lives.
In the last year, as a hero, I really had this young kid back home, Tommy Jones from the East Fremantle Footy Club. He was coming along really well as a kid, as a footballer. And tragically this year he was in a car accident. He was in intensive care, on life support, tubes in and out of him all year. So he had died, his heart had stopped, and but he found it again inside himself to stay alive. And just to see him in hospital, not being able to speak to me, but just seeing his eyes and knowing who it was, I reckon, and I could sense that and I could feel that he was there and is inspiring me on. So, I'm going to go home and see him again shortly and see how he's feeling. But he's just been the biggest inspiration for me this year. He just guided me, I reckon, and he's been fantastic for us.
I was 43 when I played my last game of football, and that was at Greensborough. And I'd been going down to a guy in St Kilda, and he'd been putting electrodes on me, massaging me and getting me ready to play each week. And in the end, I'd had it. This young bloke was giving me a bit of run around, so I abused the umpire. So the umpire turned to me, he said, "You should know better than that, Bob." He said, "You don't want to get reported at your age." And so I've given him another mouthful because I did want to get reported. So he reported me. So I went before the tribunal on the Thursday night, and there's a dear old guy there. He had the bifocals on, and "Tell me, Mr. Johnson," he said, "don't you think you should know better than to, at your age and, the length of your career to, not to talk to players, not to umpires like that?" I said, "Well, sir," I said, "he's the worst bloody umpire I've ever had to play under, and the president of the football club next to me, he said, 'Oh, geez, Bob, he didn't mean that.'" So anyway, the old bloke had been trying to help me, and every time he'd say something, I'd come back opposite, because I was only going to get two weeks for abuse of language, but I needed to get 4. So anyway, go outside, and they call us back in, and the old bloke that had been trying to help me, I've gone back in here, he said, "Mr. Johnson," he said, we've decided to only give you 2 weeks. But he said, "Of course, we could have given you a lot more." I said, "Well, isn't that right?" I got up, and I walked over the table, and I said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, you can all go and get stuffed." So they gave me another 2 weeks. I got the 4 that I wanted. So I didn't have to play again.
This particular practice match was an inter-club, and I was playing on Mark Jackson as a full-back, and he was full forward. And every time the ball came down, it seemed to be that I'd get the ball. I'd mark it over the top of him or punch it to the ground, pick it up, take off. There was one particular time that it came down, Jacko turned around and hit me and knocked me to the ground. It was the weirdest feeling. It didn't actually hurt, but it stunned, and I got up off the ground, and by the time I got up with every single player, both sides were on top of Mark Jackson. It was a weird thing to see. And Ron Barassi was very unimpressed with it all, and he told Mark Jackson that he could leave the field. We didn't want that sort of behaviour going on. It's a practice match and you don't hit your own players. Well, Mark Jackson replied, "Well, I'm only practising the way I play." So he could go along with that. So Barassi said, "Look, go in. We don't want you out here on the training track with that behaviour." And Ray Jordan had the bright idea that, well, don't send him off and waste the night. Send him over and train with the under-19s. And Barassi said, fantastic, that's a great idea. You tell him. So Ray Jordan, very unimpressed with this, ambled over to try and tell Mark Jackson to train with the thirds. And as he was about to yell out, Mark Jackson picked up half a brick that actually sit on the ground and raised it in the air. With that, Ray Jordan quickly said, Jacko, you can go in.
In 1945, I was a resident of the Melbourne Hospital, and I was in the Special Diseases Clinic, running it, the outpatient clinic, which would today be called the STD Clinic, if you're aware what I mean. Working with another great friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, Don, this fellow wants to be seen by you." And I looked at this bloke, and I didn't recognise him. He said, "G'day, Don, how are you?" And I looked at his card, and I realised it was a footballer who was in for his third attack. He knew far more about the treatment than I did, because he'd been through it 3 times. He said, "I want you to look after me, do this." And in those days, it wasn't a matter of giving a fella a few jabs of penicillin. There was some pretty embarrassing and unpleasant treatment that you had to do. So, and you had to do it every day for this bloke. And so I did it, and after about 4 days, he said, "I'll see you tomorrow." See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Oh, we're playing them tomorrow. So the next day I turned up, and there's this fellow on the other side of the ring to me. Now, this was 50 years ago, so my attitudes are a bit different from what they are today. I knew how you collected these diseases, and it wasn't by actually bumping a fellow, but you couldn't afford to take any risks. And this fellow came across the ring, and I sort of got out of his way and let him go past. At half-time, I hadn't had a kick. And Norm Smith said to me at half-time, he said, "What's the matter? What's the matter with you? You're better than so-and-so. You look as though you're frightened of him. You haven't had a kick all day." What was I to do? So I said, "Come over here, Norm," and I took him in the corner, and to my everlasting shame, I broke medical confidence and I told him the story. "Jesus," he said, and from there on he didn't get a kick either.
If you can get to a position where you're a leader at a club or you're a respected figure, then I think you've got an obligation to live up to that.
And I've enjoyed the leadership aspect and putting in when perhaps the chips are down. Everyone can lead when you're going along very nicely, but when things are going pretty tough, then I think it's the guys with a bit of character that stand up.
I love footy, and I love our footy club, and I love seeing young fellas come into a situation where they work hard and strive for something and are able to achieve it.
They come into your environment maybe for the first year or the second year, and they're still trying to find their feet, and I like to get over and just have a bit of a talk to them, and I think it's the old head and a bit of experience. You're trying to help young kids learn from your mistakes.
And I want these boys to be as good as they can be, as quick as they can be, so it's in my best interest to sit down a Shane Woewodin and say, "Look, these are some of the pitfalls that I went through and experienced, and it'd be good for you and good for me if you're able to avoid them, because it's going to fast track you, if you like." Robbie Flower sat me down at a very early age as well, and pointed out some home truths that I'll always carry with me as well.
I think that's an important part of being a leader.
The good thing about today is that even if you're talented, you still have to work hard. I never liked talented players who wouldn't work. I don't have any respect for it, quite frankly, talent, natural talent. I have respect for what people do with the talent, however big the talent is. Now, today's football is so high in quality that if you have talent and don't work, you don't make it.
You learn discipline through pushing yourself, but I always see that through challenge it's an opportunity to grow, and now I sort of in some ways get off on a challenge in a game. From that point of view, I've really enjoyed challenge, and now I really embrace them in my life rather than seeing them as an obstacle or something to fight with.
So I think your ability to persist when things aren't going all that well can sometimes be as important as anything else, because eventually things will turn for you.
If you do the right work and you keep chipping away, that eventually results will happen for you.
One of the things that you try and impress upon the boys is to try to keep at it, regardless of whether the ball's bouncing for you or not.
The biggest challenge for me is to be part of a premiership team. Certainly be doing the best I can towards it. I'm looking at 2 years and doing the best I can in those 2 years, and then whatever happens after that is again left up to great spirit up there.
And I think the best piece of advice for anyone would be, if it is to be, it is up to me. Don't rely upon the coach or your teammate. They're there to help. But in the end, it's you.
The powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?
If it is to be, it is up to me.
What will your verse be?
If it is to be, it is up to me.
What will your verse be?
If it is to be, it is up to me.
What will your verse be?
The team played fine in the year 39, where the demons that no one can lick. And you find us there at the fine